Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh. Welcome to Rebeccah Heinrichs. She is a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute, where she leads their Keystone Defense Initiative, and I've been pleased to partner with her a couple of times on Fox and other places, and I thought we got to get Rebeccah here to start talking to us. Rebeccah, welcome. I want to begin by asking you about Ashland College because your old president there was a friend of mine. I went out there and gave a commencement once. What's your connection with Ashland?
Oh, so it was a wonderful school to go to. I was an Ashbrook scholar, so I'm from rural Ohio, and I studied political science under then Peter Schramm, the great Peter Schramm, who is the director of the Ashbrook Center, who has since passed away. But it's a great political science program. Highly commend it to anybody who wants to have their children or their grandchildren study the classics from a pro-Western civilization, pro-American perspective. And I have the pleasure of serving on the Ashbrook board there now. So it's a great school.
Well, Carlos is a friend. I gave your commencement once, and I'm from Warren, Ohio. Now, rural Ohio can be either southwest or northwest. Which part were you?
So I am from north central Ohio in a little tiny town. It's Jim Jordan's district, a
Ah,
little rural town. But he wasn't the congressman when I was there. But tiny little farm town of about 1,100 people.
well, now, no wonder you make such sense. You're a Buckeye, and so I'm glad to welcome a fellow Buckeye into the program. I want to begin by asking you generally about President Trump's remarks at the UN today. We took out after the UN for migration, climate change policies, which he said are destroying the West. What did you think?
So I thought that the big takeaway was really his sort of comparing good intentions with actual outcomes. So he talked about how the UN is supposed to be an organization to promote peace, but it really has not been the UN that has done that. It's been the actions of sovereign nations and really President Trump sort of pressuring countries that have conflicts to get to a peaceful solution. And he, to your point, he kind of hit on this theme that you might have good intentions about migration, immigration, but the effects are actually terrible and disastrous. And the humanitarian view from President Trump's perspective is to close your borders, get control of your own borders, because there's terrible atrocities that are committed to people who are being trafficked, et cetera, across the borders. So I thought it was a really and then of course, and then the climate change. He made a big deal about how in this for the name of climate change, these countries have actually destroyed their economies, have cost a lot of jobs, and you still have serious polluters like China who are not are not constrained by the good desires of these Western countries on the environment. So that was kind of the theme that I saw kind of throughout his entire remarks today.
So, Dr. Heinrichs, does it improve the position of the United States for the President of the United States to be that blunt with the world? Because we're used to a lot of soft and happy talk from Presidents Biden and Obama. President Trump gives haymakers. Which is better for the strategic position of the United States?
Well, I think it's better to be clear to identify our problems well. And my favorite thing that he said today was that that America belongs to the American people. We're a sovereign nation, and so we're going to act in our own interest for the benefit of the American people. So I think that's good. Now, I also understand that in this environment we're in, we've got a lot of external threats, Hugh, China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, and we can't contend with all of them by ourselves. We have to have allies. So I think it's fine and good for President Trump to identify these problems well, as long as there's a good follow up diplomatically to get our allies on side so that we can kind of find ways to collaborate to get our individual countries in better shape so that we can compete with our shared adversaries.
Earlier today, I was listening to Aaron McLean's School of War podcast, and he was talking with General Mick Ryan from the Australian Armed Services about kinetic conflict with China. I don't actually know that I can even comprehend what that would look like. I know you spend a lot of time thinking about it. I was in Connecticut yesterday for an event. Electric Boat is there. That's where we turn out our Virginia class, hopefully our Columbia class. Do you think we can deter that conflict, or is that something that we actually have to think through on a citizen by citizen basis to prepare for? Because we're not prepared for that right now.
No, we're not prepared for that, and the best way to head it off, of course, is to prepare for it. So, I do think that Xi Jinping and sort of the rise to power and the very ideologically motivated Chinese Communist Party does want to supplant the United States as the global dominant power. And part of Xi Jinping's vision for that, of course, is taking Taiwan by force if necessary, but by coercion without force if he can get away with it. But the United States has a core interest in making sure that the world isn't sort of, divided up into spheres. We are a global superpower, and we want to have free commerce, and we believe that sovereign nations shouldn't be, of course, invaded and taken and coerced by these other powers. And so we have to deter, for the first time in history, Hugh, two major nuclear powers, China and Russia. And as you said, we're not prepared for that, but we've got agency, and we can be if we work at it.
When you think about that, how do you see the first 3 or 4 days of a conflict with China evolving?
Well, I think the first thing, our most, I would, the area in which the United States has our most forward deployed forces, that is American sovereign territory, of course, is the island of Guam. That is U.S. homeland Guam. American citizens are there, and that's how, in part, we project power into the region on our own sovereign territory. And so my concern is that if Guam is not sufficiently defended with missile defenses, that the Chinese, if they think that the United States is going to come to the aid of Taiwan, Guam is going to be the first thing that they hit. And of course, they think the calculation, if that were to happen, would be that the Americans would be frightened and paralyzed rather than enraged to continue to engage in the fight. I think it'd be a miscalculation. We know from World War II, obviously Pearl Harbor, that attacking Hawaii was what enraged the American people and brought us into that war. And so I think it'd be a miscalculation on the part of China, but I am concerned that the first days that Americans on Guam and our military there would be the first to be hit if we indicated we are going to protect Taiwan.
Are you concerned about our carriers being open to hypersonic swarms?
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm concerned about our carriers. I'm concerned about the U.S. forces that are deployed and collaborate with the Japanese. I mean, because that's going to be a really critical ally. We need to integrate with Japan, so I'm worried there. But yes, I'm worried about our carriers, and I think that we really need a sort of a different kind of military. We've been a lot of the Air Force loves fighter jets. We have to lean more on our bomber fleet because we're going to be able to we need to have range, Hugh, to have conventional and nuclear weapons on these long range bombers. The B-21 is going to replace that awesome B-2 that we saw during Operation Midnight Hammer that took out the Iranian nuclear facilities. We're going to need like 300 of those if we need to assure our allies, deter the Chinese, potentially go to war with China, and also signal to other theaters like Europe and the Russians that they better not use this as an opportunity to act aggressively there because we have significant firepower. So I would lean more on our bomber fleet as well and get a second supply line so that we can have, a lot more bombers.
Now I have to take a break. Dr. Heinrichs, if I can pause here for a moment, then get you for 6 more minutes. I want to ask you about the president's comments to President Zelensky today that NATO should shoot down Russian planes if they enter into NATO territory. So I'll be right back with Dr. Rebeccah Heinrichs with the Hudson Institute, Senior Fellow and Director of the Keystone Defense Initiative there right after this. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt, joined by Dr. Rebeccah Heinrichs of the Hudson Institute, where she is the Senior Fellow and Director of the Keystone Defense Initiative. Dr. Heinrichs, before I go to the shoot down of Russian aircraft, I noticed that you're on the board of editors for Providence, a journal of Christianity and Foreign Affairs, with which I am not familiar. Would you tell me about that? And I want to link that to your reaction to the service for Charlie Kirk on this Sunday past.
Great. Well, love to talk about Providence. So I am a contributing editor of Providence, and it is an online journal that writes about American foreign policy from a Christian realist perspective. And what I mean by that is, we believe that that we need to be realists about American foreign policy, and understand that we live in a broken world in which countries and regimes are going to have different ideologies. They're going to contest and vie for power, and many of them are threatening to harm the United States. At the same time, we must be true to our own American principles, which are really rooted in Christian ideas about the just war. a very Augustinian way of thinking about it. And so, but we, not just Augustine, but even Calvin and Luther, Protestant theologians, argued that the United States, or that countries should be both Christian and realist. And so Providence is just a great resource, I think, to look and to think thoughtfully about American foreign policy and different
I'm going to
iterations
have
of
to
it.
look that up.
Yeah, great.
There were many comments about America and its Judeo-Christian heritage at the service for Charlie Kirk, notably from the Secretary of State, the Vice President. What did you make of all that? That's probably the largest evangelical service. I know Bishop Sheen used to get 30 million people a night, but this was an overtly evangelical appeal, both a service of loss and mourning, but also of renewal and witness. I was kind of blown away by how explicit it was, and without question, with an audience of 20 million in immediate space, and who knows how many more in clips virtually distributed, that was vast. What do you think about that?
Well, first, I thought, I've spent, like many Americans, as part of my own mourning, I've spent a lot of time going back and looking at old Charlie Kirk, um, videos of him. And something that strikes me about Charlie is that he was really a classical liberal in terms of his willingness to engage with other people and other ideas, but he was also openly, explicitly, and unabashedly Christian, and his Christian arguments shaped his worldview. And so it really was demonstrating how we could, I'm a Christian, how we can engage, yes, in public discourse and making good arguments, from a classical liberal perspective, and yet that are uniquely American and Christian. And that was really evidence in Charlie's memorial service. Many public officials, Marco Rubio, I thought, had the most compelling, clear gospel presentation as our Secretary of State National Security Advisor. And I think some people are sort of taken aback by that, but that's really how many of our founders spoke,
Yes,
invoking
Beltway
scripture.
people are immediately exclaiming Christian nationalism, and they don't really understand it's a foundational understanding
Yeah.
of the West and how the United States was intended, ordained. I just was blown away by it. Well, okay, to the question of Russian fighters, Putin is obviously testing in the Baltics and Poland. Today, the president said we ought to shoot him down. Do you think we will, and what will follow?
Well, first, I was thrilled that the president responded that way, because it's not just the content of what he said, but how quickly he knew the answer to that. He was very clear in his own mind. The Russians are violating sovereign NATO airspace, and those NATO countries, again, a theme of his UN speech, sovereign nations, they have to defend themselves. And that's how you actually have good, peaceful outcomes. And so I thought that it was really powerful and good, especially, Hugh, because there's been some reports coming out that the Pentagon is considering maybe not funding what the first Trump administration funded, which was European security initiatives on the eastern front of NATO. And President Trump clearly is saying, no, in order to get the Russians to stop, you have to be clear and decisive and shoot those violating aircraft out of the airspace. So I thought that was very good.
Now, do you think much about Putin using tactical nuclear weapons? You're a strategist. You have to think about these things like you got 1 minute. I mean, is it something you think about?
Oh, yeah, I think about it a lot. I think that Putin is not bluffing. And so I think we should take it seriously. But I also don't think we should be motivated by fear and should capitulate. I think that we should counter deter Putin to understand that he's not going to gain a military advantage by threatening the United States and the West with future nuclear weapons. That we need to make sure that we maintain the nuclear peace. And to do that, we need to have a credible nuclear deterrent ourselves to make sure the Russians are not going to, they're not going to frighten us into defending our core interests and our allies.
Rebeccah Heinrichs, great to have you on for the first of, I hope, many times. Wonderful to meet you virtually and in person and be able to talk to you one-on-one as opposed to our Fox friends when they're moderating. Rebeccah Heinrichs is, again, the senior fellow at the Hudson Institute, where she runs the Keystone Defense Initiative. And we're all going to look up the Providence Journal online because that sounds interesting, too. Thank you, Dr. Heinrichs.